She held the check out to me like it weighed nothing. $80,000, written in clean, unhurried script by someone who had never checked her bank balance before a grocery run. The underground parkade smelled like diesel and curing concrete. The temporary lighting was still being strung overhead on wire clips, and November rain was driving in sideways through the access ramp, because that is just the arrangement you accept when you live in Vancouver. Sign the final inspection report tonight, Audra Whitlock said, and this is yours. I looked at the check for about 3 seconds. Then I put the flashlight back on the column. The cracks fanned outward from the column head in that tight radial pattern I recognized the way you recognize a smell from your childhood. Precise, punching shear, the kind of thing that happens when a concrete slab is slowly trying to push through the column it's sitting on because the reinforcing studs that are supposed to stop it are not doing their job. Not a surface scratch, not shrinkage cracking, not settlement. The load path was failing, had been failing for a while, by the look of the crack widths and the mineral staining dried along the edges. Ms. Whitlock, I said, I need you to clear the occupied floors above parkade level 2 and lock this site until a structural engineer gets eyes on these connections, tonight. She had the stillness of someone who had not been told no in a long time. Her project manager, Ian Sorensen, stood behind her with his arms crossed, eyeing me the way a man eyes the plumber who just told him the quote is going to be higher than expected. His coat had a logo I recognized. Whitlock Developments, Pacific Northwest's biggest name in luxury condos. 4 towers in Cole Harbor, 2 more in Burnaby, a reputation built on glass and speed, and the particular confidence that comes from never having had the wrong inspector show up. You've been on site for 35 minutes, Ian said. And the way he said it told me exactly what he thought 35 minutes was worth. I have, I said, but I've been in this building longer than that, just not as an inspector. Nobody asked me what I meant. Not yet. That was fine. Some things are better earned slowly. My name is Troy Mackenzie. I'm 43 years old. I work for a private inspection firm called Pacific West Building Assessments out of an office in Burnaby that used to be a dentist's practice and still smells faintly of antiseptic when it rains. My business cards say Senior Building Inspector, which is an accurate description of what I do and a partial lie about what I used to be. I'll get to that. First, let me tell you about Declan, because everything I did that night was really about him. Declan is 10. He lives with me full-time in a rented townhouse in East Burnaby, one of those narrow places where you can hear the neighbor's dryer through the wall, and the laundry machines are in a closet under the stairs. His mother, Renee, and I split 4 years ago. No big ending. We just stopped working. She's in Calgary now with a new partner, and Declan sees her at Christmas and March break. The rest of the year it's the 2 of us, a lunch kit I packed the night before because mornings are chaotic, and a rental statement I try not to stare at too long when it comes in. That Tuesday started like most Tuesdays. I picked Declan up from his after-school program at 5:15. He got in the truck and told me, in the serious tone he uses when he has decided something is a genuine problem, that his hockey tryouts were not going well. I keep missing the slot, he said. I set up, I shoot, I miss the top corner. Where are you looking when you shoot? The net. Which part? The corner, where I want to put the puck. That's your problem, I said. You're watching where you want it to go, not reading where the goalie's already committed. Watch the goalie's shoulder first. That tells you where the gap actually opens. He went quiet the way he does when he's turning something over. We got home. He had pasta. I helped him with a math worksheet on fractions. At 7, my neighbor Louise, a retired teacher who watches Declan on short notice with a patience I genuinely admire, came over, and my phone rang. It was Gus Pelletier, my night shift supervisor. Gus has a voice like a man who has been on construction sites for 30 years and absorbed all of it. Troy, he said, I need you in the city tonight. Whitlock Tower on Harbor Way. Developer wants a final occupancy assessment before an investor walkthrough tomorrow morning. Engineering's already signed off, but they need a second set of eyes as an insurance condition. Just a once-over. Which tower? The new one, Harbor Way Residences, 32 floors, finished interior fit-out last month. I didn't say anything for a second. I knew that building. Not because I'd inspected it, because I'd had arguments about it. In a boardroom 4 blocks from Burrard Inlet 8 years ago, to people who had looked at my calculations and decided I was the difficult one. "I'm on my way," I said. I kissed the top of Declan's head, told him to be in bed by 9, and drove into Vancouver with my hands a little tighter on the wheel than they needed to be. Here is what I walked into. Harbour Way Residences was Audra Whitlock's flagship. 32 stories of glass and engineered timber accents and a rooftop infinity pool overlooking Burrard Inlet that had been photographed for 2 architecture publications before the building was even occupied. The whole concept was biophilic luxury, which in practice meant indoor plants, reclaimed wood panels, and a price per square foot that made my Burnaby rent feel quaint. It was also the centerpiece of a $40 million investment round that Audra was closing the following morning. Ian Sorensen met me at the site entrance before I'd signed in. He told me, in the first 30 seconds, that the structural engineering had been signed off by Redburn Structural Group, that the geotechnical report was sound, that the municipal building permit was closed, and that the investor walkthrough was at 9 a.m. and any outstanding review notes needed to be filed by 6. He said all of this the way people recite things they want you to receive as settled facts. I signed the site log, clipped on my badge, and asked for access to the underground parkade. Ian blinked. The inspection scope was structural and life safety on the occupied floors. "The parkade is structural," I said. "I'll start there." He did not look happy about it, but he let me in. The parkade ran 3 levels below grade. I went to level 3, the lowest, because that is where the column loads concentrate most and where cracking, if it exists, shows up first. I went to the northeast quadrant. I knew that grid the way you know a street you grew up on, because I had spent 6 weeks of my professional life running the analysis on the post-tension slab system in exactly that location, when I was a junior structural engineer at Redburn Structural Group. When I was still a structural engineer at all. I found the first crack at column N7, then one at N8. By the time I reached N11, I had counted 4, all with the same radial pattern spreading from the column head, all with the same efflorescence staining along the edges that told me water had been finding its way into those cracks long enough to leave a mineral trace. These were not new. These were not nothing. These were a structural system trying to tell someone it was in distress. That is when Audra Whitlock came down the ramp. She crouched beside me when I was on my knees with the flashlight. She looked at the crack without flinching and asked, "What are we dealing with?" "Punching shear distress," I said. "The slab above is loading beyond what the shear reinforcement in these columns can resist. This is not cosmetic." "Is it critical?" I looked at her. "There are 32 floors above us." "Yes." She straightened up. Ian was behind her. 2 men I didn't know were a few steps back, with the particular stillness of people who have just heard something they had not budgeted for. Audra spoke quietly. "Those 2 men came from Toronto this afternoon. The deal that closes tomorrow morning keeps 200 people employed in this company. I need to know what it would take for this report to go forward tonight." I stood up. My knees cracked. "It would take those columns being something other than what they are," I said. "Which they're not. This site needs a structural engineer on site and a GPR assessment of those column slab connections before any occupancy certificate goes forward." She reached into her coat. The check had already been written. She had prepared it before she came down the ramp, which told me she had been told something was wrong before tonight, and had decided the solution was financial. $80,000. My name, the date, her signature. She held it between 2 fingers. "Note your concerns as observations," she said. "Engineers can review at the next scheduled inspection." I looked at the check. I looked at the crack running from column N7 across the concrete that held 32 floors of other people's homes. "Mrs. Whitlock," I said, "I need the occupied floors above parkade level 2 cleared, tonight." What I did next is the thing they teach you in the licensing course, and you hope you never actually need. I walked to my inspection kit, pulled out the site log, and I wrote a discrepancy notice in my own hand. Suspected punching shear distress at column slab connections, level 3 parkade, northeast quadrant, columns N7 through N11. Site occupancy restricted to parkade level pending structural assessment by a registered professional engineer. Occupancy review withheld. I signed it with my inspector registration number. The time was 9:17 p.m. The moment that entry existed, the occupancy certificate was off the table. Audra Whitlock could call every inspector in the lower mainland. She could not unwrite my report. I clipped the pen back on and looked at her. "You've been here 35 minutes, Ian said behind her. "I've been in this building for 8 years, I said. "Just not in this capacity." The parkade went quiet. "What does that mean?" Audra said. "Before you do anything else," I said, "I'd like you to make a phone call. Not to your engineers. Call EGBC's duty officer line, or call Redburn Structural Group directly. Tell them you have suspected punching shear cracking at the column slab connections in a post-tension parkade slab. Give them the building address and the permit number. And then, I nearly stopped myself and didn't, ask them to pull the original peer review file for the shear stud layout in the northeast quadrant. Ask whose name is on the dissenting technical memo in that file." She looked at me steadily. "Whose name is on it?" "Make the call," I said. "You'll find out." She took out her phone. Ian said it was nearly 9:30 at night. I told him EGBC had a duty officer line for structural safety concerns, and it did not go to voicemail. While she dialed, I went back to the columns with my measuring tape and crack gauge and documented everything: width, orientation, estimated depth, efflorescence pattern, location relative to the column center line. 4 columns, 8 pages of the site log, photographs in triplicate under 2 lighting angles. The kind of documentation that does not care about investment timelines. The data was the data, and it would still be the data in 6 months and 6 years. Audra was on the phone for a long time. Then she was just listening. When she finally lowered it and came back across the floor, she was looking at me the way you look at a document you were certain you understood and have just realized you did not. "The duty officer asked me to repeat the column location 3 times, she said. "Then he asked who the inspector was. I gave him your name." She paused. "He went quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said, 'If Troy Mackenzie flagged those connections, you should trust it absolutely, and you should have someone with GPR on site first thing tomorrow morning.'" Another pause, and then he asked me if I knew who had written the peer review dissent on the northeast quadrant shear reinforcement for this building. He told me to pull it before I did anything else. Ian's arms uncrossed, slowly the way something releases. "Who are you?" Audra said, "actually." So I told her. Standing in a parkade I had once helped design. At 9:30 on a Tuesday night in November, I finally told someone the whole thing. I did not start as a building inspector and stay one. I started as one, got my technical diploma at BCIT, did material testing and site assessments because I liked the honesty of hands-on work. Then I put myself through a structural engineering degree at SFU on evenings and weekends. And I went corporate. Redburn Structural Group, one of the premier structural firms in the city. And 8 years ago I was a junior engineer at Redburn on the design team responsible for the post-tension concrete parkade system used across several Whitlock Developments projects. This building, this parkade, these columns. I had run the punching shear analysis for the northeast quadrant, and I had not liked what I found. The shear stud rails met code minimum, barely. But when I stress-tested the analysis against long-term concrete creep, against the actual sustained load from 32 occupied floors, against the settlement profile in the geotechnical report, the margin in those specific columns got thin. Not fail tomorrow thin. Fail in 5 to 10 years if nobody goes looking thin. I wanted one of 2 things. Either additional shear reinforcement at those columns, roughly $90,000 and 3 weeks of schedule, or a mandatory targeted inspection protocol requiring visual assessment of that specific grid every 2 years, with an explicit instruction to open the fairing panels and look. Either one would have caught this. I pushed for both. I was overruled. The analysis was within code. The schedule stayed. The inspection instruction never made it into the handover package. And I was told, in the language that organizations use when they have decided someone is a problem, and want them to understand it without being told directly, that perhaps this project wasn't the right environment for me. "So you left," Audra said. I filed a formal technical dissent memo first, I said. Documented the failure mode, the timeline, what to look for, the inspection location. Put it in the peer review record, which is your professional right and your professional obligation when you believe something is unsafe. Signed it. Then, yes, eventually I left. Not dramatically. They made it clear there was no path forward, and one day I cleaned out my desk and went back to inspections. Because when I sign an inspection report, I own the result and nobody overrules me. I looked at column N7. For 6 years I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe the margin was fine. Maybe I was the difficult engineer who couldn't let go of a calculation. And then Gus calls me on a Tuesday and says Harbor Way Residences, and I drive over here and walk down to level 3, and there it is. Exactly where I said it would be. Exactly the way I said it would happen. Nobody spoke for a while. Somewhere in the drainage system behind the wall, water was running. You could have told me who you were the second I questioned your report, Audra said. If I'd led with I designed this, trust me, I'd have been one more person with a story, I said. The cracks don't care who I used to be. The GPR scan that's coming doesn't care. The data in that log is true whether I'm credible or I'm a crank. I'd rather the building speak for me. It always has. She was quiet. Then, almost to herself, my father built houses in Kelowna. He used to say the building will always tell you the truth if you know how to listen for it. She didn't explain it further. I didn't ask. The EGBC structural consultant arrived at 7 the next morning. His name was Raymond Fleury, gray-haired, methodical, and he brought 2 technicians with ground-penetrating radar equipment. He came through the parkade entrance, stopped when he saw me, and crossed the floor and put his hand out. Mackenzie, he said, I read your dissent memo when I joined the peer review board 4 years ago. It kept me up at night. He shook my hand properly. I tried to get a targeted inspection protocol added to the building maintenance standard 2 years ago. I got the same answer you did. The GPR results were worse than the surface cracking suggested. The shear stud rails in 4 of the 6 columns in the northeast quadrant showed partial weld failures at the anchorage points. 2 columns had internal concrete delamination around the stud heads, invisible from outside, not something you would find without the right equipment, and the specific knowledge of where to point it. Raymond looked at the readout, then at Audra, then at me. This building was not going to survive another winter under full imposed load, he said. Thermal cycling, moisture ingress through those cracks, sustained load from 32 floors. One of these columns would have reached critical failure within 18 months, possibly sooner. He looked up, and above us. He didn't finish the sentence softly. He didn't need to. 32 floors, fully occupied. People who had paid $2 and $3 million for a unit in a building they had every reason to trust. Audra stood very still. I was going to be in that building, she said. Not to me, just out loud the way you say true things when you need to hear them. My office is on the 28th floor. I've been up there every day for 6 months. Then she turned to me, and the managing calm she had carried all night was gone. I offered you $80,000, she said. You did. And you said clear the building. I did. And 8 years ago you tried to stop this before it was ever built, and they chose the schedule over you, and it cost you your career. It did. She nodded slowly, and you came back to it as an inspector. The buildings don't care about my engineering license, I said, and neither, it turns out, does a shear crack. Because of what was in that site log, and because of an 8-year-old memo sitting in a peer review file in the Redburn Structural Group archive, EGBC could not treat Harbor Way as isolated bad luck. Redburn had used a nearly identical shear stud detailing on 6 other post-tensioned concrete parkade slabs across the lower mainland and the Fraser Valley, all from the same design period, all built to the same code minimum margins. If the failure mode existed here, it might exist in all of them. Raymond's team in that parkade became the first data point in something much larger. Within 3 weeks, EGBC issued a structural advisory requiring targeted GPR inspection of all post-tensioned column slab connections in buildings above 10 stories using that detailing class, with a mandatory recurring inspection interval of every 3 years, essentially the protocol I had asked for 8 years earlier. Because a structural safety advisory carries regulatory weight, the BC Building Safety Standards Branch followed with a compliance directive making those inspections legally enforceable province-wide. They found distress in 3 other buildings, all from the same design period, all inspected and maintained under general schedules that never told anyone to go to the northeast quadrant and look at a specific column grid, all still occupied. I think about those 3 buildings more than I think about Harbor Way, honestly. Ours had me walking in on a Tuesday night by what felt like coincidence. Those 3 had nobody. The only thing standing between them and a catastrophic partial failure was a paragraph in a compliance directive that existed because of 4 hairline cracks in a parkade and a memo a younger, angrier version of me had filed in a peer review record when he had no idea anyone would ever open it. You do the right thing once quietly and lose your career over it, and you spend 6 years telling yourself it meant nothing. And then one November night it reaches back and saves people whose names you will never know, in buildings you will never inspect. I don't have a clean way to say what that did to me. I just know I needed it more than I understood. Audra called me 3 weeks later. She asked me to come to her office on the 28th floor of a building that was now undergoing full structural remediation at her own expense. She had not tried to minimize what happened. She had called EGBC and the BC Safety Authority herself the morning after I filed my report, before anyone required her to. She had sent written notification to all building resident and offered temporary accommodation support while the remediation proceeded. That told me who she was underneath the coat. She offered me a job. Not my old role as an inspector. A position she had created. Director of Structural Safety and Building Integrity for Whitlock Developments, reporting directly to the board, independent of construction management and sales timelines. A role that had not existed at her company before the night in the parkade. I said I would take it under certain conditions, and we negotiated them properly, on paper, with a lawyer present. The real problem at Whitlock Developments, I told her, had never been a bad inspector. Gus had sent me to that site in good faith. The problem was that on that particular night, the entire structural safety of a 32-story building had rested on one person who could be handed a check and expected to make it manageable. And the person offering the check was the most powerful person in the organization. The moment you can do that, I told her, you don't have a safety system. You have a performance of one. So here is what I asked for, and what she gave me in writing with the board's signatures on it. A structural safety authority that reported independently of construction management. Never under the team whose job was to close permits on time or keep investors comfortable. Mandatory independent structural peer review for any building exceeding 10 stories, contracted directly by the safety office, not by the design team. And a stop work authority policy. Any inspector, any engineer, any site supervisor could halt work for a structural safety concern and could not be fired, disciplined, or pressured for it, even if they turned out to be wrong. Because the day you punish someone for a stop work that turned out to be unnecessary is the day everyone on every site quietly learns to hesitate before they pull the lever. And then one day, the lever that needed pulling is not pulled, and 32 floors of other people's homes are sitting above a parkade that nobody went back to check. She signed all of it. 8 years ago, she said, when the pen was down, a company decided your concern was too expensive. I'd like Whitlock to be the company that decided it wasn't. She slid the document across the desk so I could see my name printed at the top of the new position description. It should have your name on it, she said. You paid for it twice. I didn't have anything to say to that, so I just signed. I got home late the night the paperwork was finalized, about 3 weeks after the night in the parkade. Declan was in the living room in his socks watching a Canucks game on the tablet. How'd the final tryout session go? I'd missed it because of a site meeting I couldn't reschedule. Louise had taken him. He held up his phone. A text from the team coordinator. He'd made the roster. How'd you do it? I asked. He shrugged in the careful way he shrugs when he has actually figured something out but doesn't want to oversell it. I stopped watching the puck, he said. I watched the gap behind the left defenseman. I knew where the play was going before it got there, and I was already in position when the puck arrived. I sat down beside him. "You watched the space," I said. "Yeah." He looked at me. "Not the thing you can see moving, the thing that tells you where to be." I don't know if he understood that he had just described 8 years of my life in 11 words. That the most important thing in a concrete structure is the joint that no inspection schedule tells you to open. That in a hockey play, it is the space nobody is watching. That in a career, it is the report sitting in a peer review file in a building you never go back to until one night, finally, someone does. He went to bed at 9:30. I sat in the kitchen for a while and thought about 4 radial cracks on a column head in a parkade on Harbor Way. The part that nobody's manual sent you to look at, where the load actually transfers, where everything that is wrong with a building eventually shows up if you know what you are looking for. And I thought about a younger version of me, in a boardroom on Georgia Street, losing an argument about a sheer stud rail layout and a margin that made him nervous, filing a memo into a peer review record he was certain would never matter to anyone. It mattered. It just took 8 years and one rainy November night to find out. I make a reasonable living now. Not wealthy. Not the kind of person who writes a check for $80,000 without thinking twice about it. But there is a version of that night where I take the money, and there is no version of that night where the person who takes the money gets to sit on a couch and hear his kid explain the geometry of anticipation in 11 words. I picked the couch. I would pick it every single time. So before you go, I want to ask you one thing, because I have been thinking about it since that night in the parkade, and I haven't stopped. There are people listening to this right now who have been in that room, who wrote the report, filed the memo, said the thing nobody wanted to hear, and watched the door close behind them for it. And some of you are still waiting to find out if it mattered. I cannot tell you when. I could not have told myself when. But here is what I know. The building always tells the truth. It keeps telling it until someone finally goes back and listens. If you have ever been the person in the room who said the hard no, the one that cost you something real, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone, and I genuinely want to know. And if you believe the person who says the difficult no is worth more than the person who says the easy yes, hit the like button, leave a comment so the next person finds this story, and subscribe. Because the next one has been waiting a long time to be told, and I think you'll want to hear it.